Gators Breakdown episode 101 is ready to go. This is the day after episode after LSU comes into Gainesville and defeats Florida on homecoming 17 to 6. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this episode is Will Miles. Will, yes, usually joins in midweek, but he released an article today that I definitely think needed some attention, and we'll give him some pub out there and let him pump that article because it's definitely worth the read over at SEC Country. You can find Will on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. Will, thanks for joining me on kind of a short notice for this Gators Breakdown.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It's interesting to talk about. I don't know that it's fun to talk about, but it's interesting to talk about what went on yesterday.
That's interesting. Yeah, and not fun. It's not fun the way we feel about this team after what they put on the field yesterday against an LSU team that was not riding high coming into Gainesville. But before we dive in, remember you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes, past, future, right now on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook. And if you're out there on iTunes, please rate and review the show. And kind of a special shout out right quick before I dive in here to the tailgating scene was not a disappointment yesterday. Homecoming, you could just imagine. So big thanks to the Harmonic Woods tailgate club out there. You know, Otter, Sean, John, and Sean, those guys really welcomed me and had a really good time. They listened to the podcast, so I want to make sure I gave them a shout out there. But a fun time had by all pre-game, and that's the way it's supposed to be done. So, Will, you know, the first thing I said after the first half, after the game, and also going into the season. Yesterday's game was a microcosm of, hey, no excuses. That was my thing going into this season. No excuses in year 3 for Jim McElwain, and after that game, there was no excuse for the way that game played out the way it did. It's year 3. You don't have a quarterback ready to go that can carry an offense. No excuse in that. No excuse not to lean on the running game more. No excuse for the clock management. No excuse for not getting playmakers involved enough. No excuse for the. I think the way the defense came out. Yes, they rebounded, but I mean, how many times do we have to see a slow start from them right now? You know, you got out coached early, and that was enough. So, Will, that's the initial reaction I have. Is again, like I said, it's a microcosm of the whole thing, but it's no excuse for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've pretty much covered it at this point. No, I think there were some things that you can take away from it that you can say were done well. There aren't a lot of things you can take away that were done well, but I think there are a few things you can take away. I think there are some things that you can take away and say, okay, you know, this needs to improve, this needs to get better. I don't think the coaches got outcoached in the first half. I think they got outcoached the entire game. I think it was pretty obvious. You know, in that first drive, McElwain called a timeout on a 4th down. I think they were at their own 42 or 43 on a 4th and 1, and they wasted a timeout there. And, you know, whether you need that at the end of the half or not, you don't know at the time, but that's the kind of decision you should have made while you were game planning. Hey, if we get stuck at the 41, 42, 43, what is our decision process? And it's not like they tried to draw LSU off sides. They just called timeout and walked over to the side. So, you know, again, what's going on? Did they not get the play call in fast enough where they could bring Franks up to the line and try to hard count somebody off? You know, not that would work anyway because they haven't run a hard count all year. So, you know, and that's one of the things we've been talking about for 2 or 3 weeks now. So, just very, very perplexed at some of the decisions that were made. You know, I know there are a lot of people who are going to call for firings and things like that, and I'm not at that point, nor do I think most Gator fans should be, but I certainly think they should look for improvement. And just like you look at, you know, a safety who busts a coverage and say that needs to improve, you need to look at an offensive coordinator who, you know, calls the exact same play call on the critical 3rd and 4th downs of the final drive and say, when is that going to improve? And you need to look at the head coach who doesn't, you know, who just basically gives up at the end of the first half and doesn't try to get into Piñeiro's field goal range, and ask when is that going to improve. So, you know, I think it's fair to ask when are the coaches going to improve. I think it's definitely something that needs to be done. And to be honest, this game I think lies with them.
Yeah, you know, we kind of recap the game just a little bit, but you know, you go back and look at the game. You know, the offense can't go with only having 25 plays in the first half of games only converting 1 of 5 on third downs versus a team that was struggling on third downs on both sides of the ball. But the Florida defense, while I don't think they deserve the majority of the blame for this loss. They should handle some for the first half of this offense, or first half of this game. The LSU offense was ranked 94th in the country, coming in on converting third downs only 35% of the time. The Florida defense was ranked 14th, only giving up 28% of third down conversions. In the first half versus Florida, LSU was 4 of 7 on third downs, and that helped lead the way for them to have 17, almost 17 and a half minutes time of possession. And that's another reason Florida only had 25 plays of offense. But you go back and just look at it, just rarely seemed 25 plays is not a lot. And it did seem that Florida barely had the ball. And if you go back and look at the defense, of course, it was the jet sweep that killed this Florida defense in the first half. They settled down, they stopped that play. And then that kind of leads into your article a little bit. That was one of your big points of the article that you wrote for SEC Country, posted today. But they came out and they looked lost on a play that is a staple of LSU's offense. You knew they were going to come in here and run that play, and they took advantage of a Florida defense until they stopped it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that they did one of the things that Florida looked like they did is they actually put some faster guys down in sort of the linebacker position. That was how they tried to deal with the jet sweeps initially. So Donovan Steiner, who's typically a defensive back, was in on a couple of plays where he got caught inside, got blocked by the corner, particularly on the touchdown to Gage. On one of those jet sweeps. And so they did make adjustments out of that. They played a lot of single high safety, like you and I talked about last week. So it was not the traditional 2 deep, cover 2 shell, let your linebackers run after those jet sweeps. But Danielson mentioned on the broadcast early on that Florida wasn't moving at all, really, with any of the shifts that LSU was doing. And if you looked in the second half, they were moving all over the place during the shifts. So clearly they made some adjustments. You could make an argument that it's too late to make those adjustments. But the jet sweeps weren't what killed them after the first quarter. I mean, 7 points, I think, are directly attributable to those jet sweeps. So they had, I think it was something like, I think it was 75 yards on the first 3 jet sweeps that they ran, and then they only averaged 4 point something on the 7 after that. And so Florida was able to shut those down after the first 7 points. They got caught on a couple of blitzes on the drive that led to the field goal near the end of the half. And then you had sort of the jump ball between Duke Dawson and Chark, where Chark comes down with the ball, you get the joint possession. And is that the right call? Is it not? To be honest, I don't know the rule well enough to know. I think it looks like an interception, like the spirit of the rule is that that's an interception, but I think by the letter of the law, it's probably a reception for LSU. And even more problematic on that is that there was supposed to be safety help, and it just wasn't there on that play.
Yeah, Gardner, I noticed. I mean, he just showed up late, and he wasn't. He was. I mean, he got there. He was enough in the picture to tell you he was the guy who was supposed to be there, but he didn't help make a play on the ball.
Yeah, well, and that happens sometimes. I mean, it's not like, so, you get a situation where you're trying to help out a linebacker, or you're trying to help out a cornerback in certain situations with the run or the jet sweeps or things like that, and all of a sudden you get beat deep by a wide receiver. I mean, again, mistakes happen. How do you correct them? They were playing a lot of single high safety. They all of a sudden went to 2 deep, and they were in a little bit different coverage, and they got beat. That happens sometimes. It's not necessarily. I mean, I think the idea that the Florida defense is going to pitch shutouts at this point is something that we just shouldn't expect. I mean, you give up 17 points at home, you should win.
Oh, there you read my mind. That's exactly where I was going to go next. There you go. Yep.
I mean, the other thing is in the last, I think it was with 11 minutes left, is when LSU put up the touchdown to go up 17-3. They gave up 62 yards from that point on defense. So the adjustments that were made at halftime were effective. It didn't look like it because LSU went straight down the field and scored, but I think they were able to make the adjustments that eventually allowed Florida to get back in the game. It's a young defense. The defense is not as talented, I don't think, as the team that was on the field for the last 2 years, and certainly isn't experienced enough to take advantage of all that talent. And you're going to have plays where people bust coverages, and you're going to have plays where people miss tackles. It's just the way the defense is right now. I think Randy Shannon did a pretty decent job of making the adjustments to adjust to what LSU was doing. You could argue that maybe he did a little bit too late. Maybe he should have had the safeties communicating on which side of the jet sweeps were going to come early on on the first couple of drives. You could make that argument. I don't know enough about, I haven't watched every bit of LSU tape to know to know whether that's a valid criticism or not.
Yeah, I mean, I do know that is a staple of their offense. So it's just I would hope you come out better prepared. But as we said, I think there was enough adjustments made, and once again, you give up 17 points at home in 2 days college football. 17 points enough. 17 points is enough given up to win a game, and that, of course, goes back to the offense. And wow, I mean, only 3 points in the first half. Deep ball was non-existent. Maybe not having Tyree Cleveland plays a part in that, but the run game should have been enough with the way the game looked and was going. There's no intermediate passing game right now. No getting the ball to the tight ends, relying on passes to the outsides, on the flats and such. That's really what this passing game is right now. It's all within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, and that won't get it done in today's college football. And I've been big on this word since Franks has been in, but there's no trust right now. It looks like with Franks to get that down. Yes, there are going to be bumps in the road with playing a young quarterback, much like this young defense. There's going to be bumps in the road, but I think we can still argue that this offense should be further along in the passing game, where the quarterback isn't a liability in year 3 as such it is here. He still locks onto the first read. One side of the field is being used a good bit. He gets skittish when those reads aren't there. Puts his offensive line in bad spots at times by shuffling into pressure. That's what we're seeing now, and getting sacked. He's just not comfortable back in the pocket reading a defense. And I think there is an argument to be made of not having a quarterback able to do some of those things right now. The run game is working. That is the identity, and you can blame some play calling of not relying on that enough. But there are times when a quarterback has to make a play, and in year 3, I'm still not sure it's an excuse for it to look like it does right now.
No, I don't think there's any excuse for the offense to look the way it does right now. And, that includes a lot of different places, not just the quarterback play, though obviously that's the place that's going to get most of the focus. They only threw, as far as I could tell, one screen pass. They threw one wide receiver screen out to Powell, one wide receiver screen. They only threw one wide receiver screen out to Powell. He ran it for 10 or 11 yards. They never went back to it. And I mean, that has been a staple of the offense, not just with Franks, but when they had Del Rio in there as well. So, you sort of talked about the sweeps being the staple of LSU's offense, and Florida needing to take that away. They didn't make LSU take away the staple of their offense. They just, they basically said, hey, this is our passing game and we're going to go away from it for some weird reason. The fact that Tony didn't catch one pass and didn't have a target is a real problem, especially considering he was averaging 10 yards every time he touched the ball running it, or 8 yards, something like that. And, Pirine and Davis obviously did a great job on the ground, specifically on the 2 drives that led to touchdowns. But if you looked at the drive that led to field goals, if you looked at anything that they sustained, those 3 guys were involved. And they were involved like 70% of the time. And when you looked at drives that weren't successful, they were involved 50% of the time. It's really not rocket science. You get the ball to your skill players in space and let them make plays. And that's what those wide receiver screens are supposed to do. Now, if LSU is doing something to take away those wide receiver screens, well, that means the middle's open. And if you're running the ball as well as you can, play action fakes ought to bring the linebackers up. There ought to be somebody open behind. So, again, I don't know. I'd have to go back and specifically watch every play to see what was open and what wasn't. It's kind of hard to see on TV anyway. Yeah. But the reality is something had to be open. And there were times where Franks had plenty of time. They had, the drag routes were actually working when they ran those crossing routes across, and Franks could get enough time. He was able to deliver the ball successfully. In fact, most of the drives that they had, the second touchdown drive started with an 11-yard run from Davis, but the field goal drive and the touchdown drive started with conversions from Franks on sort of those drag routes across, and then the running backs took over. So, the reality is you can't run the ball 40 straight times. You need a little something from the passing game just to keep the defense honest. And until that comes around, Florida's offense is going to continue to struggle.
Yeah, and there was one point in the game you talk about that field goal. Now, if you want to win big, you got to develop a quarterback. But Florida had success running the ball. And you could argue you should have done it more. Franks was sacked 4 times in the first half. And that put the offense in some bad down and distance calls to where passing was the only choice after that. But the Florida offense will not succeed that way. That field goal drive in the first half you mentioned, Florida gets the ball all the way down to the LSU 7-yard line, and in live, in person in the stadium, I was saying, right there, LSU's kind of reeling a little bit. You run that ball 4 straight times. That is the bread and butter of your offense right now. That's your identity, and make them stop it. You had 2 runs on first and second goal, but on third and goal at the 4, a pass is called. Franks gets sacked. But so after that, no other choice but to pat. It was on the 3rd and goal on the 4. That's when Franks got sacked. So no other choice but to kick the field goal there. But I think if your chances of scoring a touchdown are much better, and I think if you're McElwain, you take the chance. I think you take the chance, and Doug Nussmeier as well. You go 4 plays, 4 straight runs, and make LSU stop it.
Yeah, well, I actually thought they were going to run a jump pass when they brought in Tony and the Wildcat on the second play, because that would have been great poetic justice, right? Throw the jump pass down there with Tony. I don't
mean,
know.
And it is going back. It's of course we're going back, and hey, if the pass would have worked, okay, hurrah, it would have worked. But as I said, going into that 1st and goal, run the ball 4 plays in a row.
Well, I mean, I think it's process, right? We want to see a solid process, and so they ran the ball. They're sitting at what about the 6? They run the ball for a yard, then they bring in Tony, they get another yard, and then they're stuck throwing the ball. Again, the reason I was thinking jump pass at the time is I think misdirection down there to get people open, particularly with the offense that struggles, is one of the things that you want to do. But that's not where the game was lost. The game wasn't lost with that one goal line stand. The game wasn't lost, to be honest, with any particular drive. I mean, they had 3 or 4 shots in that 4th quarter to score 1 point, or I guess 2 points to win the game, and just didn't do it. And you go back and look at the play calls, and in those drives, Tony, Davis, and Pirine only got the ball like 54% of the time, when every time they were successful yesterday, it was up in the 70% range. And it's just you didn't target the players who can make a difference in the drives where it was necessary, and that's not on the players.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go next. I said the way this team fought back, they brought it in. They could have tied the game. The extra point was missed. No fault of Pinedo there. But as I was going to mention that chart that you put out of the guys who were involved, and Davis, Tony, and the like, and those guys being the catalyst of the offense right now, the scoring offense right now. So, I mean, is it yes, it might be predictable that you can't outthink yourself. Yes, it may be predictable that those guys have to get the ball. Yes, it may be predictable that you're a running offense and you want to try and catch them off guard. But I'm a big proponent of coaches outthink themselves a lot, and that seemed to be something that was going on a lot in this game.
Well, and it's not predictable if you do it well. I mean, the opening drive of the game, the first play was a fake to Pirine, a roll to the right-hand side, which usually is those guys dragging across the formation. The tight end sort of leaks out, and he's your short guy, and then the wide receiver comes across, and he's deep. And we've seen Treon Harris execute that play. We've seen Will Greer execute that play. We've seen Luke Del Rio execute that play. And instead on this one, they threw back to Pirine, and it was a 15-yard gain. Now Pirine fumbled it at the end, and luckily Martez Ivy was able to get on top of it. But it was a 15-yard gain. They never came back to it. They hit that drag route a couple of times, but they never came back to that. And it was a really simple pass for Franks. It didn't require him to do very much. It was one read. I mean, basically, if it's not open, you chuck it in the ground. And so for all the things that you're trying to do with a young quarterback, I mean, the reason they called it on the opening play is because it's the kind of pass that'll get your quarterback settled in. It's a high, it's a high probability pass, but it's also easy, and it's misdirection, and it takes advantage of a defense that's really firing to stop you. And they just didn't go back to it, and until they finally hit a screen pass to Davis on the last drive, and he broke a couple of tackles and went for 13 or 14 yards. So again, you get the ball to your playmakers in space. It doesn't have to be a direct handoff. It doesn't have to be a wildcat. It can be a wide receiver screen. You can put them in the slot and isolate them on a linebacker. You can have them stay in as the blocker, and then if the linebacker doesn't come on a blitz, they're open for a little dump off pass. In fact, on the final play of the game, Mark Thompson was wide open. If Franks had seen him, he would have gotten the first down, but instead he was locked onto Powell and threw it into 3 or 4 defenders.
I think so, and you could tell he was locked on because of what was around Powell. I mean, there was 3 or 4 defenders around him, and Franks, it was pretty much predetermined that that's where he was going to go. And I'm having trouble remembering on the play before that third down, Powell was pretty open, right? But Franks overthrew him, and it was the same exact play.
Yeah, it was the same exact play. They had Davis in. Davis picked up the blitzer, but he got pushed back into Franks, and
Yeah.
so Franks overthrew the play or overthrew the receiver, and so it was an incomplete pass. Now they had to have Davis in on that play because the clock was running,
Yeah.
and they didn't have time to run him off and bring on the appropriate personnel to run the play. My issue isn't necessarily the slant. My issue isn't that. It's that they always target Powell on
Mm.
critical third and fourth downs. There's a real tendency to do that. Against Kentucky, you could tell that they knew. In fact, Bill tweeted out after the fourth down, it was the second drive Del Rio was in where they went directly to Powell on a little slant across the middle. And basically the announcer for ESPN was saying they're going to throw it to Powell here. They always throw it to Powell here. And you knew it. You knew LSU knew that too. And then they ran the exact same play from the exact same formation twice in a row.
Yeah.
And the second time, LSU ran a different defense, and that's why Powell wasn't open. The first time, they had the right defense against the right play call, and just like I said, they weren't able to execute. But that'll happen sometimes. But at the same time, like my contention is that ball has to go to Davis. That 3rd and 3, 4th and 3, the ball has to go to Davis, Tony, or Perine. Those are your guys. They accounted for 79% of the yards yesterday.
That's where I was going to go with just these rushing numbers here. Davis, 14 carries for 90 yards, 6.4 average. Perine, 12 carries, 70 yards, 5.8 average. And Tony, of course, 6 carries, 52 yards, 8.7. I mean, you're right. And along for Davis, 25 yards. Perine had a 23 yards. Tony, 22 yards. I mean, Perine had the 2 touchdowns. But you're right. It's that triumvirate there of those guys who are the catalyst of this offense, who are the catalyst of the playmaking ability of this offense. And, while they are, you could still argue they should be used even more until it's proven they can be stopped.
Well, and you can say I'm cherry picking, and you'd probably be right saying looking at those last 2 plays. But the problem is that there's a clear delineation between when they score and when they don't. And those drives that are stalling at 4th and 1 where they have to punt, and it happened 2 or 3 times in the first half where they just came up just a little bit short of a first down. To be honest, it's because they're throwing the ball to Swain underneath, or they're wasting a down on a whatever on some sort of crossing route where, if they had just given it to the running back, they would have been better off. But, they rip off a 12-yard run and then they go away from it, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Now, if it's because so much attention is being paid to those guys, then somebody ought to be wide open. And if somebody's not wide open, then keep giving it to them because they're breaking tackles anyway.
Yeah, and we talked about, okay, this was, after they fought back, they pulled within 1 point. And this was the inexcusable part here. Another inexcusable part. The Gators offense then went on to have 3 possessions in the fourth quarter that only garnered 13 plays for 36 yards. This game, you have all the momentum right now, and all you can do in the fourth quarter is have 13 plays for 36 yards. The first drive was 3 runs and 1 pass, holding on first down. That was the drive where Swain didn't get the first down on the 3rd and 3. The next drive really got under the skin of fans when Florida comes out passing on first down. Florida had great field position on their own 38-yard line, only need about 25 to 30 yards here to get in the field goal range, and Florida comes out passing. That pass fell incomplete. Then Franks was later sacked on 3rd down, ruining the best chance Florida had to take the lead in the fourth quarter. Then comes the last drive of the game, and we just kind of broke that down. So, Will, there's another inexcusable part to me is that you have everything's in your hands here. The stadium is rocking. Everybody's feeling good about themselves, even after the missed extra point. You have, and we mentioned how the defense kept making a stand after a stand, and the offense and the running game was really, keyed here. It was really on. The ball was rolling, and then you do come out when you have a chance to win the game, 13 plays, 36 yards on 3 drives.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I were texting before that second one, and I actually was calling for that screen pass that I talked about earlier, where you roll out to the right and throw back in the other direction, because I did think it was going to be difficult. I thought it was becoming pretty clear that LSU was going to start loading the box and saying, "Hey, we don't think Franks can beat us," and they needed to pop one play. If they pop one play, they're in Piñeiro's field goal range. And they needed to pop one. And the way to do that with this offense and the way and the limitations that there are at quarterback, and the limitations quite honestly that there are at wide receiver with Cleveland and Callaway out, is to use misdirection. And so that to me was the disappointing part of those last three drives is there was just zero misdirection at all. And I've been calling for this since the Michigan game. I was expecting to see a lot of it, but just zero misdirection, zero attempts to get the defense to flow one way and then go back the other direction. And you got to believe that at that point, LSU is sitting there saying, we need to stop the run. Like, that's what's coming. We need to stop it. And you had an opportunity, and to give sort of a weak play action fake and then roll out to the right hand side and only have two guys in the route. And then you're back to 2nd and 10, and
Yeah.
we know what's coming on 2nd and 10. And then third down, they just couldn't hold up front. And in that case, again, I'd like to see a rollout from Franks. Like move where he is, and maybe that limits his reads to one side of the field, but at least you get him out of the pocket in an area where LSU is probably going to bring a blitz, and that the pocket's going to constrict pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Before the Sunday episode's a little bit shorter, so we'll do some more breakdown later this week with Bill Sykes and I tomorrow. We'll kind of talk about what is the program at the crossroads with McElwain right now, and also Will would join. We'll do the Texas A&M preview later in the week. But Will, a couple more stats, kind of before we head off on this episode. Florida averaged 65 plays per game, but against Vanderbilt last week they had 78. Against LSU, only 54 plays were ran, 11 less than the average. And this speaks to third downs. That means you're not converting your third downs. That's part of the problem. The Gators are only 2 of 9 on third downs, and that's with a run game that was having success most of the day. The LSU defense came into this game giving up 13 of 14 third down and short. That's 3 yards or fewer conversions. Florida had their first shot at this stat on the very first drive and failed to convert a 3rd and 2. Florida then failed to convert in the fourth quarter on a 3rd and 3 when Freddie Swain was tackled short, only 2 yards on that play. He could have easily fought for the first down there. Then the one that hurts the most is the last offensive drive of the game when Franks was unable to hit Powell on 3rd and 3, forcing the 4th down that also went nowhere. So LSU came into this game letting opponents convert third down and short 13 out of 14 times. Florida was 0 and 3.
I mean, yeah. So, you and I talked last Wednesday, and I said it was time to watch out, mainly because LSU's defense looked better than Florida's, and LSU's offense, at least at quarterback, looked better than Florida's as well. And in some instances that was proven out. I mean, Etling was pretty bad too, but he did make some key third down conversions. Particularly the one I'm thinking about is the one that he was running on where they caught Florida in a blitz, and he was able to. And it was a direct quarterback lead with a guy who's really not that mobile, but they decided to do it because that's what they have to do on offense to be successful. And that's what's missing on the other side is if your quarterback is struggling, let's get him in, let's put him in a read option situation where, he has the ability to run. Franks can run. He showed it in the fourth quarter, actually, or I guess late in the third quarter. He can run a little bit. So, it is what it is. I mean, the Florida offense is what it is. And, it doesn't look like it's getting much better when you put it up against talent that's better than what we've seen thus far.
Well, last thing. And before I let you go, and you've read my mind a lot this episode, so I was kind of going to go there. Can this offense get better this season? Can Franks progress enough to where he's reading past his first read? There is a bye week coming up. You got Texas A&M first. There is a bye week, but that's not usually a switch that's easily flipped.
I mean, sure, it can get better. I mean, but we've been waiting for it to get better for 2.5 years now, pretty much ever since Greer got suspended. And you could see with Greer, like there was speed, there was tempo, he was throwing little hitches and little things over the middle, and you sort of saw the light bulb go on against Tennessee, and then certainly it looked like it against Ole Miss that the light bulb was fully on, and then you get the suspension. So, and that's been used as an excuse for a while, and certainly I don't think there's any excuses at this point. It's you've got who you decided to go with, because it really did come down to, at least I think, a choice between having Greer come back 6 games into the season or having Franks come and commit to Florida, and they decided to go with Franks. And so once you decide to do that, then it's time to see that guy excel, or at least give him the opportunity to. Can the offense get better? I mean, I wrote an article about this during the offseason where I said we really shouldn't expect much more than marginal improvement, that historically offenses that have been, bottom 100 go up 10, 20, 30 slots. They don't go up 70.
Yeah.
So, the Florida offense from a scoring perspective is sitting right around 80, I think, right now against FBS opponents. And that's kind of where we ought to expect them to be. The problem is that the defense is significantly worse than last year. And because there are warts on that side of the ball, the warts on the offensive side of the ball get exacerbated even more.
Then I think the thing that hurts is, you go see a Georgia team who kind of, in a way, has the same identity. They want to run the ball. They will run the ball. And then they ask their quarterback just to make a play here and there. And that seems to, they have a true freshman doing it right now. It seems to be both offenses want to do the same thing. They want to rely on their run game, but one has a quarterback that can make enough plays, and Florida doesn't have that quarterback right now.
Well, and I think that's where some of the consternation is coming from, because a lot of people see those recruiting classes Kirby's pulling in, and they're starting to wonder, is it about to be Alabama East? And if it's going to be Alabama East, then someone is going to be LSU, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State East, and Florida is going to be one of those teams, right? And so, I think that's sort of the consternation. The 2 straight East titles are great, but there's a pretty decent acknowledgement that the East has been down. And now you've got this looming juggernaut. I mean, they got a true freshman who's playing pretty well right now. And if he starts really stepping up and making plays, I mean, Georgia's going to be pretty good. So, it's one loss. It's one data point. I keep saying that every time I come on, it's one data point. And
it should hurt because it was a game that was so winnable.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, but every game is. I mean, every game except Michigan has been winnable this year.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. So and we came into this season, every game is with the SEC teams and FSU and Michigan. So that's it. Every game was winnable. Every game was losable.
Yeah, well, and everybody looked at the Troy loss last week and said, "Oh man, they must be terrible." And everyone's going to look at Texas A&M coming off of a relatively game performance against Alabama and say, "Oh, we're going to get destroyed." I just don't think that's the case. Now, I mean, I haven't gone through and looked at all the numbers, and maybe I'll come in on Wednesday and tell you, "Ooh, I was wrong." It's going to be a bloodbath. But I don't think so. I think what we're going to find is that each team in the SEC has flaws. The flaws up in Tuscaloosa are considerably less than everyone else. And if you're not playing Alabama, then you're going to have a chance to win every week. And the question is going to be, can Georgia join that group? And if Georgia joins that group, then that's a problem. And that's where recruiting comes in and all those sorts of things. So only time's going to tell. I think they'll get better. I think Franks is going to get better the more he plays. I think they clearly have decided to get the ball to their playmakers. I mean, if in the game against Michigan, none of these guys touched the ball. I mean, Davis got it once. I think Tony got it twice. P. Ryan got it 5 or 6 times, and that was about the extent of it. And now you've got, now you're talking getting it to them 20 to 25 times a game. Should it be 30 or 35? Maybe.
No. Hopefully so. And like I said, we'll continue this week here on Gators Breakdown, and looking forward to Texas A&M. Bill and I will kind of break down more of the LSU loss, what it means for the program. Kind of SEC wrap up for a second. Auburn beat Ole Miss 44-23. We mentioned Georgia, and they destroyed Vanderbilt 45-14. South Carolina, big surprise yesterday, 48-22 over Arkansas. Alabama 27-19 over Texas A&M. Kentucky 40-34 over Missouri. And that makes the standings, of course, right now, Georgia in the East 6-0, top of the conference, 3-0 in the conference. Florida 3-2 at 3-1 in the conference. And Kentucky, South Carolina, Missouri, Tennessee, Vandy in the West. Alabama at the top, 6-0, 3-0 in the conference. Auburn 5-1, 3-0. So it was like an Alabama-Auburn battle. We'll see how big that Iron Bowl, if that's the way it shakes out in the end. Will, anything else?
Yeah, I'm curious to get your opinion, because I was going nuts with 1:33 left that McElwain didn't let LSU score.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, am I completely off base here? Because I've had some people come at me on Twitter about it, and I just feel like if you let them the only thing that saves you there is if you strip them. I mean, if you strip them when they're running the ball, the fact that LSU ran the ball was mind-numbing to me. Go dance around behind the line of scrimmage and take a knee, and then punt the ball out of the end zone on 4th down as the clock runs out. That seemed to be the move. And the fact that they lined up and ran the ball, I was like, let them score. Then you're down by 8, and you got 1:15 left, and you can go the other direction. But I just want a sanity check here. Am I?
Well, you are right in the way that's the only way Florida wins that game at that point. Now, I don't know. Yes, LSU was running it, but are they smart enough to say if Florida quote, or air quotes, lays down, and he busts a 20-yard run, is that player smart enough to then fall down, or does he go on and score and give Florida a chance? I think, of course, maybe Florida probably should have tried it. I don't know if the LSU player, whoever it ends up being, at that point does take it into the end zone and gives Florida that chance. That's what I don't know, but I think you're right. That is the only way you have at that point. Yes, you were going for strips and all that, but if LSU was, I guess if they were risking it enough to run the ball, maybe you let them risk it enough to see if they go score and you get the ball back.
Yeah, well, with 2:30, I agree, right? Because then you get the ball back maybe with whatever. Even if LSU kicks a field goal, you get the ball back with 50, 55 seconds
Yeah,
and still have the opportunity to drive down the field. But the game was over. I mean,
yeah.
it was three kneels and a punt out of the end zone, and the game's over. So I don't know. I was chucking my rolled up socks to the TV at that point. So
And we were talking about before we came here on the show, if LSU would have scored there, you would have been dead on with your score prediction of 24-16.
well, I don't know. I got enough people coming at me for predicting Florida losing, so I got to make sure you don't kick me off the podcast.
Yeah, no, that won't happen. Yeah, we'll see where this team goes from here. Will, as you said, A&M's coming up. Every SEC team has its flaws. Every week is different. This one just hurts. It stings because it was very winnable. It was a team that wasn't really rolling. They struggled against Mississippi State, struggled against Syracuse, got beat by Troy. And Florida had every chance to win this game and didn't get it done. So maybe they can rally the horses, maybe get a big win against A&M going into the bye week with Georgia coming up. But it does make this game for Jim McElwain and the noise in the system. This game against A&M is pretty big.
Oh, yes, it is. I mean, this one, then the bye week, and you can imagine if the A&M game is a loss, then the whole bye week is going to be loud. So,
Very, very loud.
and then you got Georgia coming up after that. So it doesn't get any easier. And but you know what? That's why this stuff is fun. You get to sometimes that's why it's interesting. Maybe it's not always fun, but like I said at the beginning, it's interesting. We get to see what the flaws are and figure out whether the flaws we have are worse than the opponent, and how maybe the coaches can exploit those.
Yep, and it has been announced. I'm trying to find it again. The game time. I know it's a night game for Texas A&M. I think it's like 7 o'clock or something like that. But let me see. Yep, 7 o'clock. Texas A&M plays on Florida. It was announced today that the game would be on ESPN2 in the Swamp, 7 o'clock. Texas A&M and Florida next Saturday. So, Will, anything else?
No, just looking forward to it. Want to get the taste out of my mouth of this one. That's for sure.
For sure. It would be a pretty good win if Florida was able to pull it out. So for Will, I'm Dave. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.